I will now call upon the clerk of the court to read the charges, please.
You have received includes the charge sheet. We're going to be reading from the charge sheet. The third charge that we will be discussing now is actually the second charge. Second charge concerning comrades past, present and future in Libya and Yemen. First charge is that, first article of the second charge, is that Airbus, in collusion with the State of the Netherlands and with the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO, designed, manufactured and sold weapons of mass destruction to Saudi Arabia, a protectorate of the United States of America, knowing that the weapons would be used to destroy communities, livelihoods, ecologies and lives of humans and non-humans in Yemen. 2, that Airbus, in collusion with the State of the Netherlands and with the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, designed, manufactured and sold weapons of mass destruction to Turkey, a member of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, knowing that the weapons would be used to destroy communities, livelihoods, ecologies and lives of humans and non-humans in Libya. 3, that the State of the Netherlands was involved in the wars in Yemen and Libya, knowing that the wars would destroy communities, livelihoods, ecologies and lives of humans and non-humans in Yemen and Libya, and did so with the aim of profiting from them. 4, that the State of the Netherlands prioritized the well-being and survival of Airbus, an artificial legal person, over the well-being and survival of natural communities, peoples, ecologies and species in Yemen and Libya. These activities, if proved to be true, constitute intergenerational climate crimes against past, present and future generations of humans, non-humans, cultures and ecosystems under Section 3A, B, C and D of the Intergenerational Climate Crimes Act.
Thank you very much. I will now call upon the witnesses to present their evidence in support of the charges. Our witness today is Bonyan Gamal. Gamal is a lawyer based in Yemen, and he is Accountability and Redress Officer at Mautana, a human rights organization. We will also hear from Hassan Cardno, the Libyan Human Rights Director and co-founder of Aman Organization Against Discrimination. And we will hear from Sarah Al-areqi, who is also from Yemen, and Karim Salem of Cairo Institute of Human Rights. Karim will be our translator for today. You will hear the witnesses via video link, and the translation will be by Karim. You can find the biographies of the additional witnesses in the file that has been given to you, and they will all address the court directly. Over to you.
Yes. Hassan?
نعم. والسادة كيف ما أعرف
Yeah. حسن
يس
الصوت
كريم.
بيقطع، هل ممكن تبتدي من الأول وتتكلم بصوت عالي؟
واضح الصوت؟
دلوقتي واضح. حاول. نعم.
كريم.
أيوة دلوقتي أنا سامعك لكن الصوت بيقطع، ما بسمعكش لما بتبتدي تتكلم. عايز تشيل الفيديو يمكن؟
كريم الصوت مش واضح من
Okay, we can do so.
Okay. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes,
كريم
yes, we
الصوت مش
can.
واضح
Yes,
بالنسبة
we
ليك.
Okay. I am Bunyan Jamal, and I have in my I sent in my in previously my recording of my testimony of the humanitarian situation in Yemen and the human rights situation. Hello to you all. I am Bunyan Jamal from Muwatana for Human Rights. I'm here to testify on the human rights situation in Yemen. Since the beginning of the conflict, grave violations have been committed in Yemen by all parties to the Yemeni conflict. Muwatana has documented a lot of these violations. Big part of these violations are committed by the coalition led by Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates. Muwatana has documented until now more than 400 airstrikes, near to 500 airstrikes that targeted and killed and injured civilians or targeted civilian objects. In its latest report, Muwatana has documented violations that have been a big part of the starvation that's happening in Yemen in a report called Starvation Makers. These attacks did not just target the educational system or the healthcare system, but it targeted important infrastructure that is essential for the Yemeni lives. We documented at least 90 airstrikes on farms, livestock, agricultural land, agricultural tools and equipment, and also food stores. We documented at least approximately 25 coalition airstrikes on water sites, water infrastructure and means of water transportation. We have also documented at least 16 Saudi-led coalition airstrikes on fishermen, fishing boats, fish markets, and strikes against fishing and in general in Yemen. All these violations hasn't stopped. The arms trade to countries like Saudi Arabia and UAE, on the contrary, I saw that the Airbus website published proudly that they have sold 72 Typhoons aircraft to Saudi Arabia, and these countries and these companies have a responsibility to know where their weapons are going and to make sure that they are not being used in human rights violations as they are being used in Yemen. These countries and these companies have the responsibility to stop the arms trade and hold accountable all the arms trade companies and authorities that has published and allowed for these kinds of weapons trade that eventually reached Yemen and killed civilians. Thank you. As I mentioned, we have documented close to 500 cases of airstrikes. These are the cases where we were able to reach and document. That doesn't mean that these are all the cases of airstrikes that targeted civilians and civilian objects. Although it is sometimes tough to get the remnants of these weapons, but it is very clear to be able to tell where they are going and what are they doing to civilians. And I'm sure it might be easier to understand using the very high-tech companies and equipments that created and sold these weapons and aircrafts for the final destination on where they went. I honestly wonder, in aircrafts like Typhoons, for example, doesn't it have techniques that are able to monitor where it is used, whether it is used to kill civilians or not? It should, and it should be easier to go back to the aircraft's records, to the contracts, to the information that is that should be obtained by the governments and the companies to prove that these aircraft or these weapons weren't used to kill civilians or used to kill civilians, meaning that the burden of the proof should lie there. In any ways, we have published a report on all the bomb remnants that we found. It was called Day of Judgment, and it shows the cases where we found bomb remnants on the ground, and we were able to document remnants from Italy, from the UK, and from the US. Our reports and hundreds of other reports by national and international organizations had published hundreds of reports and statements that clearly show how basic human rights were being violated by the UAE and the KSA in Yemen. For example, we documented, just to show the impact of one strike, in 2016, we documented a case in Al-Hudaydah. A family of 6 died in that strike, including an unborn child. We found bomb remnants and analyzed it. We found out that it belonged to RWM Italia of the German Rheinmetall. That strike destroyed a bigger family home and all their farm. Until today, that family still suffers from that airstrike's impact. They live now in small hay houses. They cannot, until now, rebuild their houses. They cannot rebuild their farms from which they live. And they still suffer from psychological impacts to their bigger family, to their loved ones. Okay. They until now couldn't buy any new equipment to rebuild their farms and start growing their crops again. And in last year, a family member said to us that he only wants justice. And we realized that we've been trying. We filed a criminal complaint in Italy, but we realized that until now, all the legal standards, all the international legal standards, and all the legal articles of the world seem to fail to provide any shape of justice to him and his family. And this is unfortunately very frustrating for us and for the families. It shows the importance of accountability. It shows the importance of a stand for these victims that have been suffering from these kinds of airstrikes for 7 years now, more than 7 years, and there should be very direct and very clear procedures and laws that ensure accountability. And with all that said, and knowing that it's very frustrating, we see that there are some European countries that were part of the core group that pushed for the GEE renewal in September. And we saw that there are some steps for peace in Yemen by some European countries, but these steps, along with the arms trade contradict each other, although they are very helpful and they are real good steps for peace in Yemen that should go through accountability. It's important to remind people in charge of these decisions that constant efforts for accountability and peace inside these European countries or through any UN mechanism will make a difference. And it will eventually make the difference between peace and war for Yemenis. So thank you very much.
Okay. Hey everyone, I'm Al-areqi, a Yemeni humanitarian aid worker specialized in protection. I will try to highlight today more of a general context information of the impact of arming parties to the conflict. As it is elaborated by Bunyan, it's hard to document specific cases from the ground for Airbus. So what most probably you already know, Yemen is the world's worst humanitarian crisis, but we need to emphasize here, it's a human, man-made humanitarian crisis. And personally, I believe it has witnessed one of the worst international responses so far. So we are in the 7th year of the war and no political settlement or peace agreement has been reached. The continuation of the conflict has not only caused humanitarian implication, but also the military and political precautions on the ground, which resulted in expanding the scope of war in different areas in Yemen day by day. So we need to highlight here, one of the factors of perpetrating the cycle of violence is arming parties to the conflict, which has created war economy market to inside and outside peace spoiler and has prolonged the cycle of violence. As you can notice, the number of internal armed actors in Yemen is on increase that cause fragmentations, divisions on the ground, politically and militarily, and these actors are financed, supported, supplied by external actors like Saudi Arabia and UAE. So, without going to the main actors, I know for sure you know a lot about this. There are different examples of the indiscriminate attacks against civilians documented by NGOs like Muwatana and UN Expert. So in a report presented by the Human Rights Council for a group of eminent, it was said like Yemen people have been subjected to 10 airstrikes a day, a total of more than 23,000 since March 2015. This is the start when the Saudi Arabia, UAE started the coalition and started the military operation. According to Yemen Data Project, we have 18,400 civilians who have been killed, injured, and also 3,000, among them 3,600 women, and approximately there are a number of children. And by saying this, these are not only numbers, they are people who have had life, family, future, and dreams. So with the main aim of reaching hurting stalemate and military victories, all parties to the conflict continue to commit different violations of international humanitarian law with impunity. As reported by OCHA, as I said like before, I don't want to give specific numbers because for me these numbers are representing souls unhuman at the end, but we have 233,000 people who have been lost, who have lost their lives in Yemen since the start of the conflict. And one of my personal memories when I worked as a protection staff in Yemen in 2016 for a project that targeted IDPs, internally displaced population, it always breaks my heart coming the next day after an airstrike, where as a protection staff, I couldn't really do more than measuring the humanitarian impact. I had no chance to prevent it. So, according to a report, to a statement from Amnesty International, different companies such as Airbus, among others, have been integrals of the coalition efforts arming to fleet combat aircraft that has repeatedly struck civilians objects, including homes, schools, hospitals, marketplace. Those are companies who have made millions from supplying arms and services for the Saudi UAE coalitions in the campaign in Yemen. And according to the Airbus, like I saw this one, they're publishing, they're developing a regional industrial base relying on Eurocopter Kingdom, Saudi Arabia. It is the largest subsidiary located in Saudi Arabia with more than 120 engineers dedicated to the maintenance, overhaul, and modernization. And there are different types of Airbus that we can really go through. So as a civil society organization, we would need to ask these companies to explain what human rights due diligence they had undertaken to assess and address the risk of supplying arms and services to one parties to the conflict, which I personally, I think it's one of the leading parties to the conflict in Yemen. We would also be calling on defense companies to vet clients' past performance against human rights benchmark, build high expectations of compliance with international human rights law into contracts, and continuously monitor and audit clients' performance and use leverage to influence their behavior. If it is impossible, which is the case for Yemen, to avert the risk that arms will be used on human rights abuses, companies should avoid and cease supplying to weapons. State must move from fueling the conflict by arming parties to the conflict and move toward helping the end of the conflict by supporting justice. And I'm repeating what Bunyan was saying. Why it is hard, like for the accountability in general, we would highlight that last month, members of the UN Human Rights Council voted to discontinue the international independent and impartial humanitarian mechanism for Yemen, the GE, the group of eminent experts, who are mandated to monitor violations committed by all parties to the conflict. That is really unfortunate. And what I would really be asking is we need to support the accountability in Yemen and bridge the gap of accountability in general. According to the report, the GE sale of weapons on both sides of the war has exacerbated the fighting. And finally, with lack of political support among warring parties, third countries and companies fueling the conflict, applying high-risk products to dangerous the environment, states blocking ways of accountability. As Yemeni, it's really hard to have hope for Yemen. What is happening in Yemen, I would repeat this again and again. It's a human-made humanitarian crisis, and it's responsibility for all to collectively react accordingly. Thank you.
We can start with Hassan. He's connected again. We can try. حسن ممكن تجرب؟
كويس.
علي صوتك شوية.
تسمع فيها واضح هيك؟
تمام ممتاز. ابتدي.
اوكي شكرا. الاسم حسن كذنو من منظمة الأمان لمناهضة التمييز العنصري. أنا راح نقدم اليوم إحاطة للوضع في ليبيا ليبيا لم تشهد استقرار حقيقي منذ 2014 لغاية اليوم، وذلك على خلفية النزاع المسلح بين الأطراف المختلفة سواء في شرق البلاد عن طريق القيادة المسلحة ليقودها خليفة حفتر، أو في غرب البلاد عن طريق حكومة الوفاق الوطني في السابق، وحاليا حكومة الوحدة الوطنية. على خلفية النزاع وين كريم الترجمة ولا نواصل؟
لو تحب ممكن تكمل، أنا بكتب. كمل واصل.
أوكي. كيف ما قلنا على خلفية هذا النزاع القوات المتناحرة الاثنين سواء في شرق البلاد أو غربه استعانوا بقوات أجنبية وتحصلوا على دعم إقليمي عن طريق دول جوار أو دول إقليمية أخرى لتقوية النزاع واستمرارية النزاع لأطول مدة ممكنة. بالإضافة إلى ذلك أن هذا الصراع انعكس على حياة المدنيين بشكل كبير في عديد من الجوانب، منها الاقتصادية والاجتماعية والحياة السياسية الغير مستقرة، بالإضافة إلى تأزم الوضع الأمني على رقعة جغرافية بالكامل، حيث توقف العديد من المؤسسات الخدمية عن تقديم الخدمات الضرورية للمواطنين سواء المواطنين الليبيين أو المقيمين في البلاد. وعلى خلفية النزاع أيضا توقف الوحدات الصحية عن تقديم الخدمات الرعاية الصحية، وخاصة في ظل جائحة كوفيد-19 في 2020 ولغاية الآن، ومن ضمن المتضررين منهم الموقوفين في مراكز الاحتجاز المهاجرين والطالبي اللجوء، بالإضافة إلى المواطنين، بالإضافة إلى المقيمين في البلاد. وايضا ادى النزاع الى اغلاق العديد من الطرق الحيويه في البلاد اللي يربط الرقعه الجغرافيه الليبيه الشاسعه، يربطها عديد من الطرق البريه بيناتهم، واهمها الطرق اللي هو الطريق الساحلي اللي يربط شرق البلاد بغربه بمسافه 2000 كيلومتر. اغلق الطريق لمده 2.5 عام على خلفيه النزاع المحتدم واستهداف المتكرر لبعض الاليات المدنيه بحجه انهم اليات عسكريه عن طريق الطيران الحربي سواء في حكومه الوفاق الوطني، عن طريق قاعده مصرات الجوي، او عن طريق عن طريق القياده العامه او اللي يقودها خليفه حفتر، عن طريق قاعده بنينه او قاعده الخادم او قاعده الجفره العسكريه. وايضا توقف وادى النزاع ايضا الى ايقاف الحركه الملاحه الجويه بين المطارات المحليه، كيف ما قلنا ان رقعه جغرافيه واسعه جدا، التنقل المدنيين في بعض الاحيان يحتاجوا الى استخدام الطيران المدني للتنقل من شرق البلاد لغربه او من جنوب البلاد الى شرقه او الى غرب البلاد. واستهدف العديد من المطارات وادى الاستهداف الى اغلاق المطارات لفترات طويله، وفي خلال فتره الاغلاق والاستهداف واستهدف العديد من الطائرات تابعه لشركات الطيران المدني. ومن احنا ما ننسوش حتى واقعه في 2014 استهداف واحراق مطار طرابلس العالمي واستهداف طائرات مدنيه واعطابهم واخراجهم عن العمل. نفس السيناريو تكرر في 2014 في مدينه بنغازي، بالاضافه الى في 2019 و2020 في مدينه طرابلس على خلفيه الاستهداف المتكرر لمطار مصرات المطار طرابلس مطار معتيقة الدولي، بالاضافه الى استهداف المتكرر لمطار مصرات الدولي. لان احنا في منظمه الامان وغيرها من المنظمات الليبيه وثقنا العديد من الحالات، على سبيل المثال لا الحصر في 30 اكتوبر في 2017 نعم في اكتوبر 2017.
خلينا نوقف هنا بس افتكر انت وقفت فين وهعمل ترجمه ونرجع تاني. اوكي
واضح. اوكي
تمام. So now I'm translating Hassan testimony. Hassan, he's a human rights activist from Tabu community of Libya. He's a co-founder of Aman organization working on monitoring discrimination in Libya. His testimony on the human rights situation and humanitarian situation in Libya. So Hassan mentioned that Libya witnessed instability since 2014, mainly with high scale of internal armed conflict between the East and the West. This conflict has been fueled and increased through the foreign support and had a very destructive effect on the economic, social, sanitarian, and human cost on civilian, but as well has heavily destructed the school, hospital, and access to water and electricity. He as well mentions that the vital road between different cities in Libya have been destructed because of this conflict, armed conflict supported by foreign war plans. This include as well attacks on civilian airport. As an example, we can see in 2014 the destruction of Tripoli airport, and including the infrastructure of the airport and the civilian airplanes, as well as Misrata airport, the civilian one. From the other side, we can see that war plan had made strike from Misrata air base, military air base, Benina in east of Libya, Shedem. It's a Emirati air base in east of Libya, and then in the south in the Jofra. And then I will let Hassan continue the testimony. Hassan, لو ممكن تكمل. اوكي لو حسب في دقيقة
قديش؟
دقيقة حاول يعني دقيقة ونص.
اوكي
حاول ابتدي
بالاضافه الى ما سلف ان نحن في 30 اكتوبر 2017 شن الطيران الحربي اجنبي هو سلاح الطيران المصري استهدف منزل في مدينه درنا شرق ليبيا ادى الى وفاه 17 شخص من ضمنهم 7 اطفال و8 نساء. وتكرر المشهد مره اخرى في 3 يوليو في 2019 تعرض مركز احتجاز تاجوره في مدينة طرابلس للقصف بالطيران الحربي أدى إلى وفاة ما يقارب 44 من المهاجرين وطالبي اللجوء المحتجزين في المركز الاحتجاز. وفي 4 أغسطس 2019 أيضا تعرضت مدينة مرزق لقصف طيران انطلاقتها كان من قاعدة الجفرة الحربية واستهدف خيمة مناسبات أدى إلى وفاة 43 شخص من ضمنهم 6 أطفال أقل من 16 سنة. وتكررت المشهد مرة أخرى في 28 نوفمبر 2019 حيث قصفت طيران حربي تابع لسلاح الطيران الخليفة حفتر مدينة الشرقية في جنوب غرب ليبيا أدى إلى وفاة ما يقارب 11 شخص من عائلة واحدة لم ينجو من الأسرة ما عدا رب الأسرة فقط الناجي. من ضمن الوفيات كانت 9 أطفال وأمهم بالإضافة إلى الأخت الكبرى للعائلة. والمشهد استخدام الطيران والدعم
خلينا نوقف هنا بعد كده هيبقى عندنا أسئلة وأجوبة. So just to finish with Hassan testimony, he was mentioning some specific cases where war planes had a high cost of human lives. So he mentioned one airstrike on Darna in east of Libya made by the Egyptian Air Force and killing 17 civilians, among them 7 children and 8 women. He mentioned as well attacks on July 2019 by Emirates Air Force on a detention facility for migrants who were obligated to stay in the detention facility, and we have at least 44 person killed from detainees from asylum seeker. We have in August 2019 as well attack on a civilian place in the south of Libya, killed 43 persons, including 6 children. And the last one in November 2019 when war planes bombed a home in Sharqiya, and they killed all the family and except the father, including nine children, and the mother have been killed in this incident. And this is to finish with Hassan testimony. I can as well just add in the few minutes remaining that the situation in Libya is very very dramatic. We have in both sides on the Libyan context armed group and paramilitary group acting and accredited as Ministry of Interior and Defense, including radical group, suppressing the public space, arresting defender, and implicated in high-level scale of violation against Libyan and against foreigner in Libya. This is something known by all the international community, and any support for this party from a state actor or a company should be held accountable, because there is a knowledge that you are supporting a group of criminals, and they are using the support for perpetrating further violation. And here for the case, if to mention the case of Airbus application, so Airbus application have been through the support to Turkey, a contract signed by Airbus and Turkey, where Spain was providing all the maintenance for the planes, and this has allowed Turkey to transport many military supplies for the Libyan armed group on the ground in the west of Libya. They are was implicated at least in 2 strikes, killing 2 civilians in the center and in Tripoli, in center of Libya and Tripoli. And this is what wasn't possible without the support of Airbus and the A400M, which a very big plane can take up to 37 tons. And transporting material. There is an observation of at least 10 flights in only 2 months when they started cooperation with these militias in the West. And it's just very important as well to mention in the other side that we had at least 70 strikes from Emirates Air Force. They used a Mirage 2000. So this is implicate another company, Thales and Dassault, French weaponry company, who were implicated directly with a contract with Emirates in 2019, providing them a Mirage 2000 and with this weapon, they killed at least 170 civilians in Libya, besides the destruction of many civilian and vital infrastructure. And thank you. Yes, thank you.
Thank you to all of you. If I may begin, is that okay? Yeah. Bonyan, I have a question for you. You mentioned 500 airstrikes that you have counted, many others that you haven't. Someone else mentioned, your colleague mentioned, at least 10 airstrikes a day. How many years or generations do you think it will take for people of Yemen to recover from this war and to begin something like a normal life?
I have the Yemeni recent history and even far history have seen a lot of conflicts. And the time where Yemenis recover usually surprises me. Yemenis lived and under the ruling of Imam Yahya and what they called the kingdom, Al-Mutawakkiliya kingdom, for a very long time. That was very dark times, full of conflict and injustice. But after the revolution in 1962, it only took them near 5 years to change the shape of the country, to make it a republic, and to recover from a lot of what happened in that dark area. I believe that Yemenis are hungry for a state, for peace, and that the moment that this happens, with real accountability, with real comprehensive accountability that reaches all parties to the conflict, all the parties that are responsible for these grave violations, then I believe that it will not take too much time for Yemenis to recover. I can see in the streets and all over Yemen that when there is a space for life, when there is a space for music, for fun, for life, people run for it. And that makes me optimistic that once this conflict is over, once accountability is here, it will not take Yemenis as much as people can imagine.
The technologies that are used now in this war and the technologies that were used in the 1960s that you talked about, the technologies now are far, far more destructive in the way in which they destroy infrastructure, environment, and people's capacity to reproduce life. And so I don't know if the two wars are really comparable in that sense.
It's different wars, different impacts. It is the largest humanitarian crisis in the world. My idea was there is hope and resistance and resilience within Yemenis that will help them overcome the residues of war. It will need a lot of work. It will need a lot of time. But I think it can happen, and I think we will be able to see it.
Thank you. Is there anything else that you want to ask? Or?
Shukran. I'm from the UK, and I know we've been party to sending a lot of weapons, and I'm quite sure that the many thousands of British citizens who oppose that would want to send their solidarity to you. I'd like to explore a bit more one of the statements that was made about the difficulty of bringing legal cases in Italy, I think, to hold those responsible to account, and the deficiencies of international law at the moment, and how you think they need to be remedied.
To summarize my answer here, we've been trying to file any kind of legal action in order to reach justice, and I will be specific to the arms trade part. We filed a criminal complaint in Italy in 2018. It's been 3 years now. The Italian prosecutor dismissed the case last year. We appealed, and it is now under investigation, and we are waiting. It's been 3 years, and it's one case, and until now we couldn't we couldn't reach real reparations or accountability. It should be simpler than that. The burden of this proof and accountability should not lie on us as an organization, as a local organization. We had to go through a lot of means to be able to we had a lot of help from our partners, and we had to go through a lot of means to be able to file this criminal complaint. And this is one example. We are also part of an administrative complaint in the UK with partners as well, CAT, and it's been going for a very long time. And although it's not a criminal litigation, it is administrative, and it's gone through appeal. It had many decisions, and the field keeps telling us that it should be simpler than that. There are people dying in thousands. There are people who are being affected by these weapons, and the law is clear. The ATT is clear. The internal UK laws, the internal European laws are clear, but we seem to find difficulty pushing forward in these cases. That's why we are trying to push for a criminally focused mechanism with the UN Human Rights Council, which failed in September. But that's the idea. Us as a organization will be able to file all the evidence we have. People who've been affected will be able to file all what happened to them, and it won't be as hard as it is now for simple for simple procedures, for procedures that should be simple.
Thank you. We are very, very short of time. So I will just, if I may, take one question from the jury. If any members of the jury have a pressing question, I can, yes.
مساء الخير. شكرا على الشهادات وبتمنى لكم السلامة. عندي سؤال إشكالي شوي. هل يمكن اعتبار أو فهم المساعدات الإنسانية الغربية لليمن الجريح والمساعدات العسكرية الغربية للمملكة السعودية وحلفائها على أنها مساعدة واحدة، وبالتالي قد تكون هي استراتيجية لاستمرار الوضع القائم لتلبية أهداف عسكرية ربحية في اليمن؟ My question is whether they understand or recognize Western humanitarian aid to in Yemen and Western weaponry aid to Saudi as the same, and to what extent this can be conceived as a strategy in order to generate this capital.
There was an article, I think, by The Guardian that compared the profits by the weapons trade that the UK had and the aid that it distributed. And as I remember, the difference was huge, leaning towards the profits from the arms trade. And that's why I don't know if we can say it's the same thing, but it's not it's never a solution. It's never a solution or something that could replace accountability and proper investigations into these weapons trades.
Yes.
If I may,
Yeah. If I could just respond to this. Actually, this European kind of strategy happening in Yemen, happening in Libya, in Sudan, in Afghanistan, in all these conflict areas, you will find like this, both sides of the good people, good representatives who go to there saying, hey, this is aid to reconstruct and build the destruction. At the same time, the construction or like the destruction, the people or the institutes and the states causing or doing this destruction thing, they are the same all the time. Like you will find them the same. So they are the one that when Germany send the flights and send aids to Afghanistan, and at the same time they have a military operations there and lots of army trade there causing the conflict for 20 years. So this is kind of, I see it as a politics thing. Doing the profits and then, okay, there is a percentage that we can go in the public and say we are doing good things to just satisfy the taxpayers. Thanks.
Okay, thank you for that intervention. And I think we would have loved to have more time to talk to all of you. And I'm sure the people here have time for questions to Hassan as well. But unfortunately, I think we are. Yes, you have a last question, Karim, or did you?
yes, do you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, yes. So very quickly to answer a little bit your question, I think I don't think like Bunyan that even if the Yemeni people or in Libya they are willing to end the war as soon as possible and to retake their previous life, it's very hard to overpass this trauma, and you will find children, family, and it needs a long time of rehabilitation, psychological support, and work on memory and to non-repetition. So it's something which will cost and will take a lot of time to reparation. On the difficulty on the international law, two main issues here we can mention. The first one is when we have the boycott on buying on selling weapon. Selling weapon include maintenance, and maintenance it's a lot of money in the contract of selling weapon. And here, if Airbus is contracting with Turkey at one time, and then Turkey is using this weapon after 2 years in human rights violation, Airbus will continue to provide maintenance and will not make an evaluation. And this is very dangerous. And this is, we can see it in the French ministry, government answering on that and saying that we will not follow the development after signing the contract. So this is a legal obstacle that need to be as well advocated for a replacement and to fill this gap, as well multinational companies should be as well responsible of the work of the subcontractor they are dealing with. And the last thing, I don't agree that the same actor are giving support for humanitarian aid and the one giving destruction. Here we are speaking on a company using profit, and the aid, the humanitarian aid, comes from the taxpayers in the EU. So it's a issue of how this money is managed. But it's not too, we should as well maybe question if the Emirates or Saudi Arabia, who had non-transparent way of funding for humanitarian aid, but if the taxpayer in Netherlands or in France are paying tax, and some of this tax go to humanitarian aid, we shouldn't put it in the same bag with representative from the executive or company who are violating human rights as well. We should separate the different actors as well, I think. And thank you.
No, thank you. That's an important distinction, that the Dutch taxpayers pay for the humanitarian aid and Airbus makes the profits from the war and selling arms. It's an important distinction to make.
Can I?
Yes?
Okay.
Yeah.
I would just I would just repeat what Karim has said, because the Gulf countries is one of the actors who are supporting with the humanitarian aid to Yemen. But what I would really like to say is that we need to separate what is really accountability and the humanitarian aid. Like, this is you giving to the people who are in need, but accountability should go to its process through the reparations for the victims, and for this, as I would repeat what Bunyan said, we need a criminal focus investigative mechanism that can monitor violations from different parties to the conflict. We need a criminal based on investigative mechanism that can collect, preserve evidence, which is not the case of Yemen until now, which make it really hard for the accountability. And reflecting to the question that was asked to Bunyan before, I can totally understand her. And one of the reasons why we have this cycle of violence in Yemen now, because we didn't have a proper transitional justice. If you can see, like, each and every non-state armed actors, they had the victimhood claim, but it was not dealt properly. So they had the past grievances, but we didn't really have a proper transitional justice so that we can identify victims, we can walk through the reparation, we can walk through the psychological and the post-war recovery, all stages through. So we didn't really have that properly in 90s, in the early 20s, and we don't have it until now. And I'm afraid if we don't really act now, that will be the case of violence, and it will repeat it again and again. We will not go through a peace or reconciliation if we don't really have a proper mechanism. As you can see now, it's really hard to make a case for the Airbus because we don't have, like, we rely truly and largely on the NGOs, local NGOs in Yemen, which is unfair because they are facing different risks. So that's why international community should sit together and have and contribute to having more of an accountability in Yemen, so that we can go through the transitional justice and peace and hopefully reconciliation. And as Yemenis, as Bunyan said, we are really resilient, but we need the support, the political support for this. Thank you.